Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started as a quiet morning, the kind that feels too still, too calm, like the world's holding its breath before something changes. The sunlight slipped through the blinds in soft golden lines as I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, thinking about the weekend dinner we had planned. My husband was away on a short business trip, and the house felt unusually empty, until I heard a sound I didn't expect. The creak of the hallway floorboard. Slow. Hesitant. I turned slightly, expecting maybe the wind or the cat. But when I glanced at the mirror again, I saw him, my husband's son, standing by the door, frozen in place. For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes widened, caught between surprise and something else he didn't seem to understand himself. I felt my heart skip. Not out of fear, but because in that still moment, the air between us suddenly felt charged. He stammered, trying to apologize, but the words came out in pieces. I didn't mean to." He looked away quickly, his face turning red, and I could see he was trying to retreat, to make sense of what he just walked into. But something about his expression made me stop him. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was the confusion that mirrored my own. Because for the first time, I noticed how much he'd grown, no longer the quiet college kid who barely spoke at dinner, but a young man suddenly aware of how complicated people could be. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, pretending to brush off the awkwardness. But inside, my thoughts tangled in ways I couldn't quite explain. Should I say something? Laugh it off? Or pretend it never happened? Because deep down, a quiet question started whispering in the back of my mind: why did that moment feel like something more than an accident? He lingered a little too long before leaving the room, his eyes catching mine one last time. That look stayed with me the rest of the day. I tried to shake it off, but every sound in the house, every soft echo of footsteps in the hall, made my heart race again. Something had shifted, and pretending it hadn't would only make it stronger. When evening came, he knocked on my door again, softly, almost afraid of his own decision. I could tell he wanted to talk, maybe to clear the air, maybe to apologize again. But when I opened the door, the words we meant to say seemed to disappear. The silence between us spoke louder than anything else could. And that's where everything started to change. What would you have done if you were in that moment? Would you have pushed the tension away, or faced it? Tell me in the comments what you think she should do next. Should she keep her distance, or finally ask him why he couldn't look away? The next day felt longer than usual. Every little sound in the house made me more aware of his presence. I could hear him moving around, trying to act normal, but the silence between us said otherwise. Breakfast was quiet, just the clinking of spoons and the faint hum of the refrigerator. He barely looked up from his plate, and I tried to do the same. But every now and then, our eyes met for a second too long, and neither of us knew what to do with that moment. I told myself to keep things simple, to pretend nothing happened. But it wasn't that easy. The way he glanced away, the way he hesitated before speaking, it all reminded me that something had changed between us. I could sense he wanted to say something, maybe to explain or apologize again, but the words never came out. There was a kind of quiet tension, the kind that lives between two people who suddenly see each other differently. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract my thoughts. The sky was starting to dim, painting the room in a soft orange light. Then I heard him in the kitchen, talking on the phone, his voice low, steady. He was telling a friend he'd be staying here a few more weeks until classes started again. That meant more quiet mornings, more accidental meetings, more of that unspoken energy hanging between us. He came into the living room soon after, holding a mug of coffee. "Do you need anything?" he asked, his tone polite but unsure. I smiled lightly, trying to ease the awkwardness. "I'm fine, I said, though the truth was I hadn't felt fine since that morning. There was something about the way he looked at me, cautious, respectful, but curious too, that made it hard to breathe normally. He sat across from me, pretending to scroll through his phone, but his attention kept drifting. It was strange how comfortable the silence started to feel, even with all the questions it carried. Maybe it was because we both knew the line we weren't supposed to cross, and yet both of us were quietly standing at its edge. That evening, as I was about to head upstairs, he spoke again, softly, almost hesitant. About the other day. I didn't mean to make things weird. His voice cracked just slightly, honest and young. I nodded, forcing a small smile. It's all right. It was just unexpected. He nodded, but his eyes said something more. For a second, I thought he might say it, that he'd been thinking about it too, but instead, he just smiled faintly and stepped aside to let me pass. As I closed my bedroom door, I could still feel his gaze linger, not in a way that felt wrong, but in a way that felt real. Like two people caught in a quiet moment they couldn't quite name yet. The days that followed were strangely calm on the surface, but underneath, everything felt like it was shifting. We fell into a quiet rhythm, sharing small talk over breakfast, watching TV in the evenings, pretending nothing had changed. But every word carried a weight we both avoided acknowledging. It was as if one wrong glance, one slip of honesty, could open a door neither of us was ready to walk through. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me from across the room, nothing obvious, just a flicker of his eyes that quickly turned away when I looked back. There was a softness there, mixed with guilt, like he was trying to understand what he was feeling but didn't trust himself to say it. I couldn't blame him. I didn't trust myself either. One afternoon, I went into the living room and found his notebook left open on the table. I didn't mean to look, but one line caught my eye. It wasn't a note for class, it was a sentence scribbled in the corner of a page. Some moments feel like mistakes you want to keep. I froze, unsure what to think. Maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe it was. But either way, it made my heart skip, and I quietly closed the notebook before he came back. Later that evening, the weather shifted, heavy clouds rolled in, thunder echoing in the distance. Power flickered once, then went out completely. The whole house fell into darkness. I grabbed a candle from the drawer and lit it, the soft glow casting shadows across the walls. That's when I heard his voice from the hallway. "You okay?" He stood by the doorway, the candlelight catching his face. He looked different, older somehow, calmer, but his eyes still held that same uncertainty. I nodded. "Just another storm," I said, trying to sound casual. But the silence that followed wasn't casual at all. It was filled with everything we hadn't said. We sat in the glow of the candle, listening to the rain. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was something else, something deeper. I could feel the questions hanging there. Was it wrong to care too much? Was this just confusion, or something that had been waiting to happen all along? Before I could say anything, he stood up suddenly and said he was going to check the fuse box. His voice was steady, but I could tell he needed a reason to leave the room, to break the tension that neither of us could manage anymore. When the lights finally came back on, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air carried something unspoken, a promise or a warning, I couldn't tell which. The next few days felt heavier, as if the walls of the house were holding on to every unspoken word between us. We both tried to keep things normal, but it was impossible to ignore the shift that had already happened. Every small moment carried meaning, a glance, a pause, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was alive, filled with questions neither of us dared to ask. One evening, my husband called to say he'd be staying another week for work. I told him I understood, keeping my tone light, but the second I hung up, the air in the house changed. It was quiet again, too quiet, like the world had given us more time we didn't know what to do with. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying every conversation in my mind. The sound of the clock ticking felt louder than usual. Then, from downstairs, I heard the faint hum of music, soft, distant. I followed the sound, barefoot on the cool floor, until I reached the living room. He was there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, the dim light from a lamp tracing his face. He looked up, startled for a moment. "Sorry, did I wake you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Couldn't sleep," I said quietly. There was a pause, then he smiled, that same hesitant one I'd come to recognize. "Guess we're both bad at pretending everything's fine." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time, neither of us tried to hide behind polite conversation. We just sat there, talking about nothing and everything, his classes, my work, how strange the house felt when my husband was gone. But beneath every word was something else, something that felt dangerously close to the truth. The rain began again, tapping softly against the windows. I noticed his hand resting near mine on the couch, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating between us. Neither of us moved, but the tension in that stillness was louder than the storm outside. It wasn't about crossing a line, it was about what we both felt standing right next to it. When the clock struck midnight, the lights flickered again. The sound made us both laugh, breaking the moment just enough to remind us where we were. But then our eyes met, and the laughter faded into something deeper. He looked like he wanted to say something, to finally let everything out, but before he could, a sudden knock echoed from the front door. The sound froze us both. It was too late for visitors, too unexpected to ignore. The knock at the door echoed again, sharper this time. We both froze, unsure whether to move or stay silent. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the porch roof. My pulse quickened. It was late, too late for anyone to visit. I stood up slowly, glancing back at him, and saw the same uncertainty in his face. When I finally opened the door, I expected maybe a neighbor, or a delivery gone wrong. But instead, there stood my husband's sister, soaked from the rain, her expression unreadable. "I tried calling," she said, brushing water from her jacket. "Your phone kept going to voicemail." I stepped aside to let her in, still processing the sudden appearance. She had always been the type who noticed everything. The way her eyes swept across the room made me nervous. She smiled politely, but there was something questioning behind it. "Didn't mean to surprise you both," she said, glancing toward him as he stood from the couch. "I just needed a place to stay tonight. Roads are flooded." It seemed harmless, yet the tension in the room only thickened. Her presence shifted everything. What had been quiet and unspoken now felt exposed under the weight of another set of eyes. He excused himself, saying he'd get her a towel and a spare blanket, leaving me alone with her in the kitchen. "You two seem close lately," she said casually, leaning against the counter. The words sounded innocent, but the tone wasn't. I forced a small laugh. "Just trying to keep busy while your brother's away." She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. He worries, you know. Says you've been lonely lately." Her comment lingered long after she went upstairs to rest. I couldn't tell if she was just making conversation or if she had sensed something more. When I went to check the doors later that night, I found him sitting on the stairs, deep in thought. "She suspects something, doesn't she?" he said quietly. I hesitated. "There's nothing to suspect," I replied, but even to my own ears, the words didn't sound convincing. The next morning brought a strange calm. His aunt, or rather, my sister-in-law, was already up, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked at us both with a knowing half-smile. "Your husband just texted me," she said. "He might be coming home sooner than you think." The air shifted instantly. He and I exchanged a quick glance, both trying to act unaffected. But inside, my mind was spinning. If my husband came home early, everything, every quiet moment, every unspoken feeling, would have to disappear overnight. Throughout the day, small things started to go wrong. I misplaced my phone, the Wi-Fi went out, and every time I tried to focus on something normal, I found my thoughts circling back to the same question: had his sister noticed more than she let on? That night, she mentioned hearing voices downstairs the previous evening, soft, low, like two people whispering. Must have been the TV, I said quickly, but the doubt in her eyes said she wasn't convinced. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that what had once been quiet curiosity had turned into something far more dangerous. It wasn't just about feelings anymore, it was about what would happen if someone else uncovered them. Now, even the smallest sound in the house felt like a warning. And deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. The next morning, the house felt heavier than ever. The rain had finally stopped, but the silence it left behind carried a strange kind of tension. His aunt was already up, packing her bag near the door, saying she had to leave before the roads flooded again. I tried to sound calm, offering her coffee, but her eyes lingered on both of us a second too long. Before she left, she turned to me and said quietly, "He reminds me of his father when he was younger." Careful with that. There was something in her tone, half warning, half understanding, that sent a chill through me. Then she smiled like nothing was wrong and walked out into the morning light. Once she was gone, it felt like the house exhaled. He looked at me, uncertain, as if waiting for permission to speak. "Do you think she knows?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "It doesn't matter now," I said. But the truth was, it did. Every secret has a weight, and ours had been growing heavier every day. That afternoon, I got a message from my husband. "Flight home tonight. Can't wait to see you." My heart sank as I read it. This was the moment that had been hanging over us, the point where everything had to either end or be exposed. I showed him the text, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was too much to say and no safe way to say it. He nodded, eyes lowered. "Then this is it," he said softly. The finality in his voice hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to respond, to ease the pain in that moment, but before I could, the front door opened. My husband's voice filled the hallway, tired but warm, the sound of normal life returning. Time seemed to slow. I turned, forcing a smile as he walked in, wrapping his arms around me. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, just a husband coming home. But behind him, his son stood still, eyes full of everything we couldn't say out loud. For a moment, I thought the secret might stay buried. But then my husband reached into his bag and pulled out a small wrapped box. "Found this in the drawer upstairs," he said lightly. "Didn't know you liked candles this much." He smiled, but I froze. That candle, the one from that night during the storm, wasn't supposed to be there. His eyes shifted between the two of us, something unreadable in his expression. The silence stretched, sharp and unbearable. Then he laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You two must have gotten close while I was gone." It was said like a joke, but his tone wasn't joking at all. The air in the room stayed heavy even after his laugh faded. He set the candle on the table and walked past us, but something in his eyes said he was still thinking, still piecing things together. The tension didn't explode, it just lingered, quiet but strong, the kind that doesn't need words to say "I noticed." Dinner that night was calm, almost too calm. We talked about his trip, about the delays, about everything except what mattered. Across the table, his son barely spoke. He looked distant, thoughtful, like someone who already knew this was the end of something that was never supposed to begin. Later, when the house went quiet again, I stood by the window watching the rain return. He came to the doorway, not stepping in, just standing there. "I'm going back to campus tomorrow," he said softly. "It's better that way." I turned, meeting his eyes one last time. "I know." There was nothing else to say. Some stories aren't meant to be told out loud, they just stay in the spaces between what people almost said. When morning came, he was gone. His room was clean, his bag packed, his mug washed and placed neatly back in the cabinet. My husband didn't ask any questions, maybe he didn't need to. Sometimes silence protects more than truth ever could. Weeks later, I found that same candle tucked away at the back of a drawer. I lit it one last time, watching the small flame flicker and fade. It reminded me that even quiet moments can change everything, and that sometimes, the hardest part of love isn't what happens, but what's left unsaid. What do you think? Was it right for them to walk away, or should they have told the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me if you'd like to see a sequel exploring what happens years later when they meet again.